The Ummah loves him. There were some people that were confused by some doubt spread by Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhli from Naysabur, who basically was jealous of him. He's one of the scholars of Hadith. Was jealous of him and spread some mistruths about him. Because when al-Bukhari came to Naysabur, the same place where al-Dhuhli was teaching, al-Dhuhli's study circle began to get smaller and smaller, and Bukhari's study circle kept getting bigger and bigger. So al-Dhuhli was a human being, and he got jealous. And he began to spread things about al-Bukhari that weren't true about his aqeedah. He said that al-Bukhari said that the Quran was created, and that the person, when he recites the Quran, his recitation of the Quran is created. And Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhli actually spread a lot of fitna about Bukhari. May Allah forgive him. To the point that if al-Bukhari traveled after he reached Naysabur and this fitna happened, al-Dhuhli would send ahead messages to the places he was going, to the leaders of the people, warning them against al-Bukhari. So 2 of the major scholars of Hadith were affected by that. Other than that, people didn't take that position from al-Dhuhli. And that's why Bukhari's honor is still preserved, and nobody believes that he was a mubtadi'. Al-Dhuhli said he was a mubtadi', made tabdi', warned against him. But no one took that from him except 2 of the major scholars of Hadith, Abu Hatim al-Razi and Abu Zur'a. Both of them were influenced by al-Dhuhli and took his position on that. It wasn't correct to take that position because they were not, they should have been investigated. Those claims should have been investigated because Bukhari never said that the Quran was created. In fact, he stopped where the Salaf stopped. He remained safe from that fitna because when he said, people were trying to get him to say that the Quran was created, basically. So they said, okay, the Quran is not created, it's the speech of Allah. What about when you recite the Quran? This recitation, the words that came out, is your recitation. Now, is that created or not created? So Bukhari said, the Quran is a speech of Allah, it's not created, and your actions are created. And he stopped. Because that's where the Salaf before him stopped. And they didn't go into that new matter, that new question in Aqidah. What about this recitation, the Quran, when you recite it and it comes out, is that the speech of Allah, is that the attribute of Allah? Or is that your action? So it became an issue that the Bukhari didn't know the Salaf used to talk about, so he left it alone and said, the Quran is a speech of Allah and your actions are created. And he left it alone like that. So the people who had jealousy in their heart, they said, okay, put them together. He's saying my action, my recitation is a created thing. Therefore, my recitation of the Quran is created. Therefore, the Quran is created. That's what Bukhari is saying. So, but in essence, Bukhari was loved wherever he went, in general, and there was this confusion that arose from the actions of Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhli. Even al-Bukhari, in his justice, it shows you that he was a true Imam. He narrated from Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Dhuhli in his Sahih after the fitna. But he was a human being and he couldn't name him with his full name. So he would say Muhammad ibn Abdullah, or Muhammad ibn, I think, Ahmed one time. Or one time he says Ibn Khalid, Muhammad ibn Khalid. He names him by one of the names of his grandfathers. And he doesn't say al-Dhuhli. He says Haddathana Muhammad ibn Khalid. I think it's Muhammad ibn Yahya ibn Ahmed ibn Khalid or ibn Abdullah ibn Khalid or something. So his great-grandfather. So he still kept the ahadith. Muslim, on the other hand, Muslim became very angry when Muslim was a student of al-Dhuhli as well. So Muslim was in Naysabur, that's where he's from, studying under al-Dhuhli when Bukhari came, and he used to mix with both. He used to go to Bukhari's study circles and al-Dhuhli's study circles. And al-Dhuhli one time got very severe in his fitna, and he said, anybody who sits in this study circle and still goes to that mubtadi' has to get up and leave and get out of here now. So Imam Muslim got his clothes together, picked his books up, started walking over the necks of the people, and as if he was disgusted, went and took all of his narrations that he wrote from al-Dhuhli and threw them on the doorstep of al-Dhuhli. Abandoned the narrations from al-Dhuhli. And that actually put more fire in the fitna and made al-Dhuhli become more... It didn't help. But look at Bukhari, how he still, even he was the one being talked about, he still narrated from al-Dhuhli in his Sahih. So then, just a clarification about what was said yesterday about the term muttafaqun alayh, agreed upon, right? I mentioned to you that there's two meanings that are understood by people. One is that Bukhari and Muslim agreed on this hadith, and another interpretation is that this hadith is agreed upon by the ummah. if the person means when he says muttafaq alayh, because some of the scholars use muttafaqun alayh just to mean Bukhari and Muslim use this hadith in their sahihs. So then it's correct to say muttafaqun alayh means it's in Bukhari and Muslim. However, if you mean muttafaqun alayh and there's no chance of looking into the authenticity of the hadith, meaning that this is one of those hadith that the ummah has agreed upon, so then therefore you mean muttafaqun alayh, the ummah has reached ittifaq, then that has to include an additional condition, that it's muttafaqun alayh. Bukhari and Muslim had brought the hadith in their two sahihs, and it was not a point of criticism from any of the ulama, like a Daraqutni or other than Daraqutni. So then it becomes a source of ijma'. The hadith is not only authentic because it's in Bukhari and Muslim, but it's authentic by way of ijma' of the Muslims. And so once a Daraqutni contradicted that, or he went against what most of the Muslims understood, that Bukhari and Muslim were accepted, that small number of hadith cannot be considered that there's ijma' over those small number that were criticized in Bukhari and Muslim. However, as I mentioned yesterday, the haqq with most of those is that it's with Bukhari and Muslim, and anytime there is a real point of criticism established, it's usually with a phrase or the mention of a name of a person that really doesn't have any impact on the fiqh of the hadith or the authenticity of the hadith in general. Today, is our last class, our last week, our last day of classes for the week. Normally we'll start, inshallah, next week, 4 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. This week was a short one to finish up the registration and everything, the first part of the week. And now we're in full swing, inshallah. There will be a test, inshallah, a quiz, 10-question, multiple choice, online for the registered students, and that'll be available Saturday morning. You have in your folder a letter called Getting Started. Take a lot of care of this. And this one called Getting Started, it has your password and your sign-in name. So don't let anyone see it, and maybe it's wise to fold it up. Once you see what it is, fold it up, so that if someone looks in your folder, they wouldn't get your password and sneak online and corrupt your tests and cause you to fail. But you'll enjoy the testing. They're not going to be very difficult. Inshallah, many of your university students are used to online testing. It's very simple. Go online, pick one of the answers for each question, and go to the next question 10 times, and you're done. And inshallah, you all are truthful and upright, and Allah is watching over you, and you all know that cheating is not permissible, and no one would cheat, and no one would be like a munafiq who wants to be praised for something he doesn't deserve. So everyone is far away from that. No. So this. Okay. جيد. تفضل يا رب.
When answering questions,
Uh-huh.
when you don't know the answer and you look up in your notes or somewhere the answer, like learning answer, is that considered cheating?
When you're taking the quiz? Yeah, the quiz is basically a quiz. You study before the quiz, shut your books, and spend about 10 minutes online taking the quiz. Yeah. A closed book test. Yeah, thank you. Closed book test. Yeah. There'll be 4 quizzes when you go Saturday morning, and you log on. You have Aqidah, Hadith, Fiqh, and Tafsir. Every subject we've had so far. Tonight we'll have Fiqh and Tafsir. Yeah, basically nothing will be outside of what we mentioned here, inshallah ta'ala. And it will be a simple question like a Sahih Hadith is a Hadith. Simple answers. One will obviously be correct and the others will be incorrect. Inshallah.
What if, is there a time limit?
There's a time limit. I think put like 60 minutes on there. You can sit there for an hour if you want and look at 10 questions. But it's very important that you don't log off. Once you log on to take a test and you pick the test and you open the test up, don't log off. And try not to use an internet connection that might cut off, because that will make your test, that'll basically sign you out and your test will be over. So don't log out or shut your computer off or any log on like before you have to go somewhere so you have to leave or something. Give yourself a half an hour or so as a safety zone and sign on and try to make sure you finish the 10 questions. They're not long, they're 10 multiple choice questions. There's nothing to type, just picking A, B, C, or D for each question.
Just to make ourselves ready, the final would be multiple choice, or it would be more explanatory?
The final exam will be basically the same types of questions from these quizzes. From the pool of questions that you'll be asked during these quizzes, most of the questions from the final exam will come from them, and there might be one question, fill in the blanks, or answer on your own, write in your answer. But that'll be live here in the masjid, the final exam, insha'Allah. We're trying to finish the work on the sound system so we can start. What's nice about it is that once we make it available Saturday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning, it'll be there until the end of the course. So if you're very busy now and the next week and everything, you can postpone all your quizzes for the next 3 weeks. They'll always be available there. Once you take it, you can't take it again. You can only look at the results. So if you take it as soon as it's available, that's fine. If you take it near the end of the course, it's fine. They'll become available every week on Saturday, the tests that go with that week. So you'll find Aqidah 1. That's the test, the Aqidah test for the first week. Aqidah 2 is the Aqidah test for the second week, and so on. Fiqh 1, Fiqh 2, like that. So you can wait and be lazy and not take any tests and any quizzes, and then near the end of the course take Aqidah 1, Aqidah 2, Aqidah 3, Aqidah 4, Aqidah 5, Fiqh 1, Fiqh 2, and so on. Registration is going to be finished at the beginning of the next class on Monday morning. Whoever hasn't, or Monday's class, whoever hasn't registered by that time, we're going to have to shut the registration off. So that'll be the second week of classes. I'm not sure. I'm not sure right now. I know you can see your results right after you take the test, and at least you'll be able to see you got 8 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 7 out of 10. You may not be able to see which ones you got wrong. That might be annoying. We'll try to make sure that you get to know which ones you got wrong if you got some wrong, inshallah. Nami Ahmed, you got your folder? Oh yeah. Anybody didn't get a folder who registered? Hassan? Ahmed Ali? Adi al-Hamidi, Ma'ruf. Yeah, inshallah. I don't have their folder ready.
The question I was going to ask, with all the caution that we get on the notes, what advice can you give us, and what's the best way to use to get benefit from our notes in terms of studying times, and how do we study for tests?
Well, you'll see the nature of the quizzes, that they're not going to be very difficult. The only things that will be asked about are the main points of the lecture. The main points of the lecture. If I said, for example, the hadith was collected in Abu Dawud and at-Tirmidhi, I won't mention the hadith and say where is it collected, and you have to remember that this hadith is from Abu Dawud and at-Tirmidhi. Nothing like that. Rather, basic information that is an indication that you understand the very theories, the main concepts that are part of that science. With regards to the science of hadith, for example, that's important that you know 5 conditions for someone being adal. 5 conditions for the authentic hadith. Those are basic definitions that you have to know. If we mention 5 conditions and we focus on them, then you should know 5 conditions. And,
sisters can hear.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'ina amma ba'd. This is the first class in our series of lectures from the book Bulugh al-Maram. Bulugh al-Maram is a book on the adillah of the ahkam, evidences that go along with fiqh rulings. Hadith al-ahkam. Hadith, it's a collection of ahadith, one after the other, with no mention of the chain. An fulan qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. On the authority of so and so from the Sahaba, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said such and such, or did such and such. These ahadith are only about fiqh rulings. Only about fiqh rulings. So then the book basically is a fiqh book and a hadith book. Bulugh al-Maram is a hadith book. Since there are no opinions in it, there's no deductions, there are not much speech in it except for hadith. So it's a hadith book. It's also a fiqh book, since it's organized into fiqh chapters, and you can extract a great amount of fiqh and understanding of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the ahadith mentioned in the book. So it's a fiqh book and a hadith book. Specifically, this is a category of book called Hadīth al-Ahkam. It's not really a fiqh book or a hadith book. There's a separate category called Hadīth al-Ahkam. Hadiths of fiqh. Or you can say fiqh al-hadith, the fiqh of hadith. And the importance of fiqh is, of course, well known to all of you. Fiqh means faham, to understand, to have any understanding of the text. It's much better than reciting the text with no understanding or memorizing their usage in certain places without really understanding how the text works. Understanding the real meaning of the text and being able to apply it in situations, that's the fiqh in the deen. And that's what the Messenger ﷺ spoke about when he said, "Men yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqqihhu fid din." Whoever Allah wants good for him, He gives him fiqh in the religion. He gives him understanding. He gives him knowledge of any fiqh in the religion. And fiqh does not necessarily have to be that you are a blind follower of an imam of a madhab, or that you are a person who goes by a set of rulings, from a certain madhab or a certain group of people or a certain imam. But rather, fiqh is understanding the meanings of the book and the sunnah according to the understanding of the Sahaba. That's the true fiqh. And whatever goes against that, no matter how great the person who said the statement, then it's not fiqh of the book and the sunnah, and it's incorrect fiqh. So we're going to be looking at the book of al-Buyu', business transactions. And the reason why we chose to go over the book of business transactions, and you might say, why doesn't the brother start with Kitab al-Tahara, like many people have done, or Kitab al-Salat, and so on? Because I believe you have attended fiqh classes before, and most likely it was Kitab al-Tahara or Kitab al-Salat in the beginning of the fiqh chapters. And from my experience with the people in the West, they have a lot of seminars and workshops on fiqh or series of classes, most always Kitab al-Tahara or Kitab al-Salat from the beginning of the chapters of fiqh. So I said, then there's no problem. What's the problem here? So we wanted to pick a topic that hasn't been discussed. We don't have any CDs. Kitab al-Buyu', the chapter of business transactions, a chapter that inshallah will present something new to the Western audience and be able to be of benefit without having a prerequisite. Like, you don't have to understand Tahara to understand business transactions. You don't have to understand any other chapters that came before it to really understand the meaning of the business transactions. And business transactions, basically, it's a chapter that each and every one of you is in need of. The knowledge of what the Messenger ﷺ has legislated for us regarding how we do business. Each and every person does business. And so the knowledge of fiqh that's wajib on every Muslim is that knowledge that he needs for his daily life. He needs to know how to worship Allah, so it's wajib on him to learn wudu, the conditions of the salat. It's wajib on him to fast, so he must learn the rulings of fasting. It's wajib upon him to pay his zakat, so he must learn the rulings of zakat, and so on. Each and everything he needs to function as a Muslim, an obedient Muslim, and to fulfill his obligations, and take care of all of his religious duties, he must learn. He must learn the fiqh of that thing. And that's what's wajib on every Muslim. That's the knowledge that's wajib on every Muslim. Then the knowledge that's beyond that, any affairs that you are not directly involved in, then they become supererogatory for you or not obligatory. Issues and topics that you don't deal directly with and you don't need in your daily life, they're still considered knowledge. However, it's not wajib on you to learn those things. So as a priority, you should be making sure that you have all of the... You should make sure... There it is. Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullah. You should make sure that... all of the affairs you need for your daily life are things that you have put efforts to learn the knowledge that's there in the book and the sunnah for you. And that's a very important affair. So now we're going to go into the book of al-Buyu', the chapter of business transactions from this book, Bulugh al-Maram. There's another book in Hadith al-Ahkam that you may have heard of that has less ahadith, and the ahadith are from Bukhari and Muslim. Do you know the name of that book? There's a book that talks about the narrations, the hadith that are related to fiqh, and it's usually it's a beginner's book. All the hadith are from Bukhari and Muslim. Umdat al-Ahkam by Abdul Ghani ibn Abdul Wahid al-Maqdisi, died in the year 600. His book is considered the beginner's book for hadith about ahkam. And Bulugh al-Maram will be the next step. So it's a little bit beyond the beginner's level. The book Bulugh al-Maram is a little bit beyond the beginner's level. It has some difficulty when we study it, but I wanted to pick this because it's going to go along with our Hadith course, and the way we're going to study some chains sometimes, look at the different reasons why ulama rejected some ahadith, or why there was differing over the authenticity of some hadith. So if we took from Umdat al-Ahkam, we would find all the ahadith are from Bukhari and Muslim. And so there's no discussion about the chain or the authenticity or the narrators. So then we'd be limited to just the text of the hadith, and I wanted to expand and include some of the things we're going to learn in the hadith class to be applied to our ahadith that we take in the fiqh, in our fiqh class. So that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to go over Bulugh al-Maram and not Umdat al-Ahkam. And Umdat al-Ahkam would be easier, there are less ahadith, and also the ahadith are, as a negative point, they're not as comprehensive because they're only from Bukhari and Muslim, and there are many ahadith in the Sunan and other books that are important for our fiqh that are not found in Bukhari and Muslim as well. So Bulugh al-Maram is a bigger book, and it's more comprehensive, and it gives the student more of a chance to look at ahadith which are authentic and some ahadith which are not authentic, and to have a need here to distinguish between the two. So that's one of the things we're going to do as we go through these ahadith. Ibn Hajar is the author of Bulugh al-Maram, the man known as Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar, and his full name is Shihabuddin Abu al-Fadl Ahmad bin Ali bin Muhammad bin Hajar al-Asqalani. For short, Ahmad ibn Ali al-Asqalani. Abu al-Fadl. Abu al-Fadl. Shihabuddin Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. He died in the year 852. Ahmad ibn Ali al-Asqalani, he died in the year 852. He's well known. He's the one that everyone refers to as Ibn Hajar. There's no other person referred to as Ibn Hajar. And there you see that sometimes the ulama are referred to by the name of their grandfather, or in this case, the name of the great-grandfather, because he was Ahmad ibn Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Hajar. He was referred to as the son of his great-grandfather. Like that is Ibn Taymiyyah, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Hanbal was the grandfather. Ibn Taymiyyah was the grandfather. And some people said that was his grandmother. And others, many other scholars were named after their grandfathers, or given a name ascribing to their grandfathers, but they had a father's name that they skipped in that ascription. So Ibn Hajar was a great hadith scholar. He died in the year, as I mentioned to you, 852. He was of the Shafi'i madhab. And I mentioned to you one of the books he wrote yesterday in the hadith class. Does anyone remember that book? Fath al-Bari. No, Fath al-Bari, the explanation of Sahih al-Bukhari. He also wrote a book called Hadith Sari, which is the introduction to Fath al-Bari, where he talked about the issues related to studying Sahih al-Bukhari. So from the many, many books Ibn Hajar wrote in hadith and hadith sciences is the book Bulugh al-Maram, and a very excellent book, collection of about 1,600 hadith from the two Sahihs and from the Sunans, and sometimes from Sahih ibn Khuzaymah and different sources. So he used a wide variety of sources for his ahadith. There is a well-known sharh explanation of Bulugh al-Maram, which is usually the most relied upon book to give explanation to Bulugh al-Maram, and it's by Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Amir al-San'ani. He's known as al-Amir al-San'ani. He died in the year 1182. So he's come in about 300 plus years after Ibn Hajar to explain Ibn Hajar's books. There's also another book by a recent author, Abdullah al-Bassam, the sheikh from Saudi Arabia, who was from the Hanbali madhab. And this book is also a very good explanation of Bulugh al-Maram. It's called Tawdih al-Ahkam. Tawdih al-Ahkam. An explanation of Bulugh al-Maram by Abdullah al-Bassam. Anyway, we're going to basically take most of our points from the hadith critics aspect of the chain, or of the beginning of the hadith, and then a lot of points of benefit will come from the book Subul as-Salam. Subul as-Salam by Al-Amir as-San'ani, Muhammad ibn Ismail as-San'ani. He died in 1182. That's the name of his book, Subul as-Salam, fi sharhi Bulugh al-Maram. Subul as-Salam. No. So there you have some background about the books of the field, the authors, and some idea about what we're going to be studying, the kind of angle we're approaching this science from. You should have, inshallah, when you come to the class, Bulugh al-Maram. It's only one volume. If you don't own it, then try to find it. You can buy it, inshallah, and bring it to the class. It's only one volume. Tafsir ibn Kathir is available in 10 volumes. And I'm assuming that most of you don't have the whole set. So, you have it. Who has Tafsir ibn Kathir? All of it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Okay, about 10 of you. So I'll try to make 20 copies of the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir, the section, or the Surah al-Hujurat that we're going to study after Maghrib, inshallah ta'ala, for those of you who don't have it, because it would be kind of expensive to buy, the 10 volumes. And in fact, I know the store here, they sold their last copy. So we'll make copies of that surah only. It's about 20 pages from Surah al-Hujurat. And we won't base our entire discussion of Surah al-Hujurat on Ibn Kathir, but we will benefit from it and read from it, insha'Allah ta'ala. So go in here, let's begin with the first hadith. Does anybody have Bulugh al-Maram with them? You want to read the hadith?
Narrated Rafi'a bin Rafi radiallahu anhu, the Prophet was asked, what type of earning is best? He replied, a man's work with his hand and every business transaction which is approved.
Good, very good.
Reported by Al-Bazar, Al-Hakim, graded it second.
Good, okay. The hadith, Ibn Hajar begins his Kitab al-Buyu' by saying the chapter of business transactions and those things which are forbidden in business. And he brings the first hadith, which is in the English translation number 648, on the authority of Rifa'a ibn Rafi'. Rifa'a ibn Rafi'. Now, Rifa'a ibn Rafi' is the son of a companion, is not a companion. And here we have the son of a companion narrating from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this, the first thing that comes to your mind is this must be an error. And if you were to look in the book by Al-Amir as-San'ani, you will find that as-San'ani mentions that Ibn Hajar, the same author here, he mentioned this hadith in another one of his books called Al-Talkhis al-Habir, which is a book of takhrij, and he mentioning narrations in fiqh and tracing them to their sources. He mentioned this very hadith, and he mentioned that it was on the authority of Rifa'a ibn Rafi', on the authority of his father Rafi' ibn Khadij. So the error here is either from the author himself or from the narrators of this book. They skipped the phrase on the authority of his father. So it should say, narrated Rifa'a ibn Rafi' on the authority of his father Rafi' ibn Khadij. So the narrator of the first hadith is Rafi' ibn Khadij, radiyallahu anhu, who was a companion. He narrates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, Ayyul kasbi atyab, which of the kinds of earnings or livings that a person can make is the best and most pure? It's tayyib, it's more tayyib than the others. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded by saying, Amalu rajuli biyadihi wa kullu bay'in mabrur. A man who works with his hands and every type of honest sale, every type of honest business transaction. And this was reported by al-Bazzar, who has a musnad. It's called Musnad al-Bazzar, or also called al-Bahr al-Zakhar, Musnad al-Bazzar, and al-Hakim as well. Al-Hakim has a book called what? Al-Mustadrak. He came behind Bukhari and Muslim. He was a critic of Bukhari and Muslim as well. Al-Hakim, he died in the year 405. Someone threw a note outside the door. Al-Hakim died in the year 405. Came 150 years or so after the two sheikhs, Bukhari and Muslim, and he was a critic of the two sheikhs. His book was called the Mustadrak, meaning he came behind Bukhari and Muslim, and he brought a hadith that he felt, in his opinion, they should have been included in Bukhari and Muslim because of the strength of their chains.
Unless we can go back there.
The mustadrik is the one who comes behind someone and finishes the job. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. The mustadrik is the one who comes behind someone who's done something and they finish the job. They feel the job wasn't complete. So he called his book the mustadrak, the completion of the job. So he came behind them and he brought around 7,000 hadith that he felt should have been included in Bukhari and Muslim. So he was critical. He wasn't critical from the angle of Daraqutni in his book called Tatabbu', who said these hadiths should not have been included in Bukhari and Muslim, and he picked away at certain points in ahadith that are in Bukhari and Muslim. Rather, his criticism was the opposite, meaning he came and said, there are other hadith which are just as authentic as your ahadith, so you should have used them, and here they are, 1, 2, 3, and he put them in order of the fiqh chapters. So Al-Hakim collected this hadith in his book. So when you hear Al-Hakim collected a hadith, it's in his book, Al-Mustadrak. Unless someone says Al-Hakim collected it in another book, and he mentions another book, because Al-Hakim had other books. But when it said Al-Hakim collected it, without any further information, the understanding is in his book, Al-Mustadrak. Around 7,000. I think according to the version that's checked by Sheikh Muqbil ibn Hadi rahimahullah, I think it's 7,047. You guys can check because you have it in the library if you want. Just grab the... That's the point. Al-Hakim believed that all these ahadith were authentic. Occasionally he would say that there's a problem with some point in the chain or something, but the basic idea is that this is a book from the books which are considered to be all sahih by the author. Now he was mutasahil, he was lenient in his grading of ahadith, so he included many ahadith which are not authentic. And that's something that he's been criticized for by scholars of past and present, that he brought many ahadith, some ahadith which were fabricated. They're not even close to the level of Bukhari and Muslim. They're not even close to the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim. But he was lenient in his judgment of the narrators. Allahu A'lam. Exactly how much I haven't studied al-Mustadrak to know. Yeah, Sheikh Muqbil ibn Hadi, he goes through it and he sorts through it and he mentions points against Al-Hakim. Al-Dhahabi also had a book where he criticized Al-Hakim. So Sheikh Muqbil goes and he mentions what Al-Dhahabi says as well, and then he adds to that some other points. It may be that Al-Dhahabi was silent about a point that he should have spoken about, and Sheikh Muqbil comes along and mentions it, or he mentions the statements of the ulama. Naam. So the first hadith there, the first point we want to talk about is that Rifa'a ibn Rafi' is not the narrator of the hadith, rather he narrates from his father, Rafi' ibn Khadij. That's the first point. From the benefits of the hadith is that firstly we see that the Sahaba used to ask about each and everything. Here's a question posed to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam: which kind of work is best? What kind of work, what kind of profession is the best profession? So they used to ask him about each and everything that would benefit them in their dunya and in their hereafter. So here's something benefiting them in the dunya. Which kind of work to do is the best for me as a Muslim? Secondly, there's an indication in this hadith that professions are on different levels, and some of them are better than others. Professions are on different levels of goodness and purity and wholesome and being beneficial to others, and they're all different levels. Some of them better than others. As-San'ani said in Subul al-Salam, the word atyab, meaning which one is best, means most halal and has the most barakah. It's the most halal, meaning it's clearest in its halal nature, and it has the most barakah, the most blessing. So the answer of the Prophet ﷺ was, a man working with his hands. A man working with his hands. As-San'ani comes along and says, and a woman too. The hadith is not restricting this to male and not to female. However, a woman working with her hands is also a good profession, and a tayyib, from the best of the professions. Also, the word mabrur, kullu bay'in mabrur. The word mabrur is translated here in the English translation as a transaction which is free from cheating or deception. As-San'ani, he mentions that as well. It's free from false oaths. A transaction that has no false oaths in it. That's a kind of cheating. You swear by Allah that your product is going to last, or it's good, or something, and it's really not that good. And also, and also any type of deception. And that's mentioned by As-San'ani. Mabrur, you notice, students of Arabic, it comes from the root bar, from bir. So it's bir, and it's the transaction that has bir in it. And bir means ihsan, and every type of thing that Allah loves. So, al-birru husn al-khuluq, the transaction that has good manners in it, the transaction that has leniency in it, the transaction that has, in general, honoring an elder in it, the transaction that has good speech and smiling, and in general just good manners. All of that would be from bay al-mabrur, the transaction that is that has bir in it, has goodness in it. And of course would have anything that's mabrur that has bir in it would not have anything haram in it. It would not be cheating, it would not be deception, it would not be falsely praising your products, it would not be claiming things about them that are not true, and so on. That's what we can take from that hadith. This hadith was collected, as mentioned here, by Al-Hakim and Al-Mustadrak from 3 different chains. On Abi Burda, this is just some information additional. On Abu Burda, on the authority of Abi Burda. And there's a problem with that hadith. Bukhari mentioned one of its narrators has a problem with his authenticity. A second one is also slightly weak. And the third one is declared Hasan by Al-Hakim, the one that's on the authority of Rafi ibn Khadij. Overall, the hadith is considered to be sahih by way of its numerous routes. And that's why you have here, وَصَحَّهُ al-Hakim, and Hakim declared it to be sahih. The second hadith we have there, number 649. Who else has the Bulugh al-Maram? The only one with Bulugh al-Maram? Tayyib, can you read the next one for us?
Narrated Jabir bin Abdullah radiallahu anhu. I heard Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, in the year of the conquest when he was in Makkah, Allah and His Messenger have forbidden the sale of wine, dead animals, swine and idols. He was asked, O Allah's Messenger, what about the fat of a dead animal? For it is used for talking ships.
For greasing ships. Yeah.
Greasing skins and making oils of lambs. He replied, no, it is unlawful. Allah's Messenger ﷺ then added, may Allah curse the Jews. When Allah and the Most High declared the fat of such animals unlawful, they melted it, then sold it and enjoyed the price they received.
Jazakallahu khair. There we have agreed upon, right? From yesterday. Agreed upon means what? By Ibn Hajar, he means it's collected by Bukhari and Muslim. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's agreed upon by all of the ulama, and there's no criticism against the hadith. However, it's agreed upon, meaning Bukhari and Muslim both collected the hadith. That's the intended meaning by Ibn Hajar when he said, muttafaqun alayh. The hadith is on the authority of Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu. He said that he heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam saying the year of al-Fath, the year of the conquest of Mecca. What year was that? 8. Very good. Who said that? 8. It was the year 8. And it was in what month? The month of Ramadan. It was in the month of Ramadan in the year 8. When he was there after the conquering of Mecca, he said, Inna Allah wa rasuluhu harrama bay al-khamri wal-maytati wal-khinziri wal-asnam. Verily Allah and His Messenger have declared the impermissibility of the sale of khamr, intoxicants, and al-mayta, and the improperly slaughtered animals, or dead meat, and as well swine, the meat of the pig, and idols, and these statues that are worshipped. Statues that are worshipped. So al-mayta is that which has been killed or lost its life by other than the Islamic slaughtering method. It's called mayta. Anything that has died without having been slaughtered Islamically. Excluding from this is the fish in the sea. Excluded from this are the animals, according to some of the scholars, animals that are hunted and shot with an arrow. Because the Prophet ﷺ told us to say Bismillah and shoot the arrow. And he did not order us to slaughter the animal after we find it. Some of the scholars say no. When you find the animal that has died from your arrow, you have to go up and cut one of the jugular veins as well, at least one of the jugular veins. However, some of the scholars said it's sufficient to just obey the order of the Prophet ﷺ and say Bismillah when you shoot your arrow, and that's sufficient, even if neither of the jugular veins are cut. Exempted from this rule as well of mayta is that which is captured by the hunting dog. It's permissible to own a dog for the sake of hunting. And the Prophet ﷺ told us to say Bismillah when we release our trained dog. So the trained hunting dog goes and he grabs the animal for you and kills it. And you notice that he did not slaughter the animal, he didn't cut either of the jugular veins. Some of the scholars say that's enough, that's sufficient. Because you said Bismillah when you released your dog, it's sufficient, whether the jugular vein was cut or not. Other scholars say no, when the dog brings you the animal, you have to cut one of the jugular veins, at least one. So according to some of the scholars, we exclude from the Mayta animals gathered from hunting, either by an arrow or a gun in this case as well, or the dog, the use of a dog, or any type of hunting animal. If you use a bird, like an eagle, a condor, or anything that you would use to hunt game, according to some of the scholars. However, all of the scholars agree that the fish in the ocean do not need to be slaughtered. They don't even have jugular veins, so there's no need to slaughter the fish that are found in the ocean. So other than that, any animal, and of course we're going to add that's permissible to eat originally, that's not slaughtered according to Islam, then it's called mayta. And it can be called mayta as well if it's not permissible to eat, but it doesn't matter whether you slaughter it correctly or not. It wouldn't become halal by slaughtering a pig, for example, at his jugular vein. So it's mayta. That's mayta. Then some of the scholars discuss what is or before we mention that, in one narration, there's mention of only Allah Azza wa Jal, that verily Allah has prohibited those 4 things. And in another narration is like this one here, Allah and His Messenger have prohibited those things. So when we say Allah and His Messenger prohibited those things, we mean Allah is the one who declares halal and haram, and the Messenger ﷺ has conveyed that. And the Messenger ﷺ was not a musharri', he was a human being, rather he conveyed the sharia from Allah Azza wa Jal. Anything that he declares to be halal or haram is from the wahi, from the revelation from Allah Azza wa Jal. So we discussed what the meaning of mayta is, dead meat. And now we want to discuss what some of the scholars said. What is the reason why mayta, the first 3 things in the hadith, are prohibited? Intoxicants, dead animals, and swine. Why are they prohibited? Some of the scholars said because they are najas, because they are impure. Because Khamr and dead animals, any improperly slaughtered meats, and swine, they are najas. Some of the scholars said that. However, the evidence to support that is not found. Support the idea of alcohol being najas, the flesh of a dead animal being najas, or swine being najas. There needs to be an evidence, because we have a principle in fiqh that everything is tahir and everything is halal until there is evidence to prove that it's either najas or haram. So as for the alcohol, many of the scholars declared it to be najas. However, there are a number of arguments against that, and one of the more clever ones that I learned from my Shaykh Muhammad Umar Bazmul, Hafidhahullah, he said that when the companions learned of the prohibition of alcohol, what did they do with their alcohol? They poured it. Where did they pour it? In the ground, specifically where? In the roads of Medina, the streets of Medina. So it was said that the roads of Medina flowed red with wine. So if the Sahaba knew about najas and tahara, would they intentionally put something najas in the streets where people walk? Or wouldn't they pour them out near the bathrooms, near the places where there's najas? So this kind of deduction was used by my Shaykh Muhammad Umar Bazmul to support what many of the ulama have said, that alcohol is not najas in the first place. So what seems to be the case here is that, as As-San'ani concludes in Subul al-Salam, that it's prohibited because the Messenger ﷺ prohibited it. And there's no real indication as to what is the reason for the prohibition. However, it's prohibited. And anything that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited, or that Allah prohibited, is harmful for us. It's harmful for us in general, in the dunya and in the akhirah. And things that are tayyib in their nature, they're good and wholesome, have been allowed for us. And things that are harmful in their nature have been prohibited from us, for our own benefit. What about, as what some scholars mention, and San'ani mentions in Subul al-Salam, what about the hairs of the dead animals? And their wool, or their skin, or their, forget the skin, I mean the actual hair. The hair or the wool. What about that? Is that considered lahm or mayta? Is that considered as mentioned by the Messenger ﷺ, that when Allah has declared something to be impermissible, the Jews, what did they do? They took the meat and they melted it, the fat, the shahm. They took the fat and melted it. So that fat is actually part of the meat, and it's actually part of the animal. However, here we have something on the outside of the animal, the hair. So is this hair considered to be part of the meita? And what seems to be correct is that it is not. It is not considered to be part of the dead animal, and that you can take advantage of the wools or the hides, even the skins, after tanning. Since the Prophet ﷺ saw some of the companions abandoning some skins and hides from animals, and he asked them, why are you leaving these skins out and why aren't you benefiting from them? And they said, because it's meita. These are animals that died without being properly slaughtered. So he said, why don't you make, tan? Why don't you tan them and then use them? The Prophet ﷺ directed them to tan the hides and then make use of them. So in that hadith it shows that even the meita, the skin of the meita, is exempted from the generality of the prohibition of the meita. And here we have an idea, something called takhsis al-am, to specify the generality of something. There's a general text prohibiting meita. Right? This text in general, the one we're studying now, is a general text. And there's a specific exemption of the hide that's tanned. The hide of a meita, the hide of an improperly slaughtered animal, after it has been tanned, that it's permissible to use. The idea of specifying this generality is found in the same hadith, the very idea. Where can we find in this hadith the idea of specifying something general? When the Prophet ﷺ informed these companions, right, that Allah and His Messenger have forbidden these 4 things: the sale of intoxicants, dead animals, swine, and idols. Were the companions wrong for asking a question that they asked? What about the what? The fat. The fat is part of the dead animal, right? The fat is inside the dead animal. It's part of the dead animal. Were they wrong for asking this question? Do you blame them? Or do you say they were seeking takhsis al-am? They wanted to know, is this a specific exemption from that general ruling? Because in our deen, it's established that we have general rulings and specific exemptions from those general rulings. And that's the case. They were asking, not after something's been made clearly haram for them and they just want to make it halal. Rather here, they understood that there are general rulings in the deen. And sometimes you can make specific exemptions from them. So they sought clarification from the Messenger, ﷺ, showing you that it's an understood principle by the Sahaba that generalities can be specified. So here they asked for those things. So the Prophet ﷺ did not rebuke them for their question, which shows that he allowed the understanding that there can be something specified from a generality. So rather he did explain to them that in this case, those things that they asked about, using the fat of the animals to burn in their lanterns, or to grease the ships, or to use for other good, possibly good uses, he just clarified that those are not permissible uses, that those are not allowed. Those are not exemptions from this generality. Those are they take the same ruling as the general ruling, that they're not permissible. That's the idea here, because he didn't rebuke them for their question. That shows their question has a basis. There can be exemptions from a general prohibition. That's the whole idea. Jazakallahu khairan. So the Prophet ﷺ further explained the danger of using parts of a dead animal and the way of the Jews and what they did when Allah prohibited things for them. May Allah curse the Jews. When Allah the Most High declared the fat of such animals unlawful, they melted it. They melted the fats and they used it. They sold it and devoured its price. They took the profit from it. No. The next point is that the sale of idols. There are idols. Let's say that we have now in our possession, we used to be idol worshippers, we accepted Islam now. Now we have the idols that are in our houses that we used to worship. What do we do with them? Can we sell them? Can we melt them down? Can we break them into pieces? What if these idols are solid gold? What if the idol is solid gold, meaning you can break it and smash it up and sell the gold? Or is it that we have to throw it away? The hadith indicates apparently that we can't benefit from it. So the scholars, they discuss this issue. If the idol has no possible way of benefiting from it, meaning you can't smash it up and use its parts for something beneficial, when you smashed it up, it wouldn't be considered an idol. Once you smashed it up, it would no longer be considered an idol. So once you smash it up, you could use its parts. Some of the scholars said this. Others said no. The safer position is that you do not smash it up and try to benefit from the parts of it, or melt it down and sell it as gold, or anything like that. Rather, you just rid yourself of it totally, because of the apparent prohibition found in this hadith. That when Allah prohibited something, He prohibited its price. So you don't melt down your gold statue and sell it. You just get rid of it. And that seems to be what As-San'ani leaned to in his conclusion in Subul as-Salam. When the Prophet ﷺ said here in this hadith, no, it's unlawful. La, huwa haram. What was he talking about? It is unlawful. The word in Arabic, huwa. He was asked about, or he talked about 4 things, and then the question came up, what about the fat of the dead animals? And he was asked about 3 uses. So when he said no, it is haram, was that referring to the fat itself? Or was it referring to the usage of the fat, or the price that one would pay for the fat? Or what was the Prophet ﷺ referring to when he said it is haram? The scholars mentioned some possible explanations. Some of them mentioned the sale of that fat, that it's not permissible. And some of them mentioned, no, the fat in general, in all of its uses, is impermissible. And that seems to be closer to the truth. Because if you said the sale of it is impermissible, then that means you could make use of it with other than selling it. Meaning, if you had some dead meat, you could feed it to a dog, or you could use it as bait when you go fishing, or you could make some use of it. So that would allow that if you understood to mean his statement, it is haram, meaning the sale of it is haram. However, that seems to be out of the context of the hadith if you were to think about it. He's asked about using oils, or the fat of a dead animal, for greasing ships, making oils for the lamps, and he says, no, that's haram. You really can't understand from that he's saying, no, the sale of it is haram. Rather, the clear understanding is, no, the actual thing and all of its uses is haram. And the last point we'll take from this hadith is the general principle that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits something, He also prohibits its price and its sale, and any transaction involved in that. And here we have a prohibition of the fat, and mentioning that the Jews were cursed because the fat of such animals was prohibited, yet they melted it down and sold it. So when Allah prohibits something, He also prohibits its sale and the price earned from it, from that sale. That's a general principle. And also that tricking yourself into doing the haram is the trick of the Jews. They would be prohibited from doing something, and they would do a hila, they would do a trick, and to get away from the apparent ruling, they would do something else, as they used to do when they prohibited on their own selves fishing on Saturdays. They prohibited themselves from fishing on Saturdays. So Allah revealed revelation to affirm the fine, you want to prohibit fishing on yourselves? Then fishing is prohibited indeed on you. They used to do that, always seeking to make things difficult on themselves. And then when they made it too difficult on themselves, they would disobey Allah Azza wa Jal. So here, they used to prohibit fishing on themselves, and then Allah revealed that fishing was not allowed on Yom As-Sabt. So then they did a trick. What did they do? They put the nets out on Friday night, and they would come get the nets on Sunday morning and collect all the fish that the net had gathered. So the Jews are tricky, and the Jews in their nature, they are harsh in their rulings and difficult in their rulings, and then they're disobedient and they don't follow the actual letter of the rulings in the first place. So Muslims have to be aware of this approach, this methodology, and do not follow in the way of the Jews. And the last hadith we're taking this evening, the third hadith, or should we even take that hadith now? We have to leave some time for a break before Maghrib for the people to be refreshed. We don't have a lot of bathrooms, and people need to stretch and prepare for Maghrib. So we'll stop here after taking 2 hadith. And in general, we'll try to take 3, 4, or 5 hadith more than this during our sittings from Bulugh al-Maram. We ask Allah to benefit us with beneficial knowledge and to grant us success in righteous actions. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Any of the scholars have a lot of opinions. Some of them said farming. Some of them said, what was it? Some of them said industry, building. The bottom line is the Prophet ﷺ was asked this question. I didn't like to bring that in the class because it's sort of related to our tafsir. لا تقدموا بين يدي الله ورسوله. The Prophet ﷺ was asked this question and he answered. So to look to the opinions of the scholars, which profession is best, when the Prophet ﷺ has answered the question, it's sort of like turning away from what's best and going towards the opinions of people. When they're just opinions, and most of them were speaking in line with what was best in their time and the place where they lived. Because now would we apply agriculture to our time and say that's the best and most beneficial profession for the people? When we have a lot of other things that have opened up, and stick to some opinion of a scholar that only had a few factors that he was living with and situations that he was dealing with. So those opinions, really I didn't see a great benefit in gathering them for you. I read some of them and I didn't see a great benefit in mentioning them. Since the Prophet ﷺ himself was asked, what's the best profession? He said, working with your hands and every good and righteous sale. Let's answer with that that's the best profession by way of a text from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah knows best. And I don't mean that the scholars oppose this hadith, but they gave it, working with your hands, what's the best way to work with your hands? Agriculture or industry or those kind of things. So I don't mean that the scholars oppose this hadith with their opinions. What I mean is they gave it specifications that are just based on opinions without really being able to use text to prove what they were saying. Allahu Akbar.